All right, hello. In this video, we are going to go over different methods on how we're going to be able to make this text stand out. Now, I do want to note that even though we are working with a type layer masked image, these tools are not specific only to type to layer mask. It's basically any image, any layer that has invisible pixels. Now here's a problem. Say for example, once I bring back my background image, notice that my type layer that's on top disappears. I want to still be able to see it. One method of being able to do so is through the use of what are called layer styles. So what I have right here, I am going to temporarily hide my background image, and we could see what we have right here. And I'm going to go ahead and double click on this layer right here, which is right now is called background layer. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this like a robot mask because it has a layer mask. And if I double click on this layer, not to rename it, but over here anywhere on the right hand side, it opens up this window which is called layer styles. Within the layer styles, it has lots of different options. So we're not going to go over all the options right now, but I want to point out just a couple of the options. Say, for example, at the very bottom, we have what's called a drop shadow. Now, I don't want to only just click on the drop shadow. I want to click on the word to show the different options. Now, with the drop shadow, you can see that it's giving it a little bit of the illusion that it's creating a shadow around it. You have different options right here. You could change the opacity. You could change the angle. Right now it's set to 30, but depending on where you want the angle to, to be at, it's a little hard to see. Let me go ahead and increase the distance so you can start to see the drop shadow. So going back to the angle, this is kind of like where is the light source coming from? So do you want the angle, the shadow to be at the bottom right hand corner? Do you want the light source coming from the left, creating the shadow going towards right? So the choice is up to you. I'm going to go ahead and choose something right here. Now notice that there is this use global light, that whatever angle that you have set, other options will also use, if they're using this angle, it's set to globally, so they'll all be going in the same direction. You have options to change the distance, where if this is really far out. You also have options to change the spread. Kind of makes it a little bit larger along the edges of the shadow. And also the size. Now if we increase the size, notice that it gets to get really blurred out. If you have a size of 0, it has a hard edge. So sometimes I like to have like just a softer glow. Now you're also able to change the color using through blend modes. Right now it's set to multiply, but depending on what style you want to use. Now we haven't covered blend mode just yet in class. This is something that we're going to go over in a future class session, but this is how the colors of the current layer are going to interact with layers underneath it. For a drop shadow, multiply works really well. And also, I failed to mention over here on the far right hand side, you have a little preview of what it's going to look like. Now this is drop shadow. If you're fine with this, you could just leave it as is. But you also have lots of other type of styles that you could experiment with. I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off for right now. And we have, for example, the bevel and emboss. There's different types of styles. I highly suggest that you experiment with these. You also have a stroke. I like the stroke because this is one way of being able to create an outline. And right now I have white, but what if I want something other than white? I want a blue color, and I want to increase the size of the stroke. You could even change the position. Right now it's set to outside, inside, or center. Right now I'm going to leave it to outside. If I create this large enough, you can see that creates this nice outline that goes all around my lettering. You also have an inner shadow. I'm going to increase the distance. It almost makes this look like a cutout. And here, let's check what this looks like with the image. I'm going to go ahead and tell it OK. Now notice what we have now within our layer. We now have this layer has an effects layer. We could always turn it on and off. This turns off all the effects. Or if I have more effects, you could turn off each one individually. I'm going to bring back my background layer. And this is what it looks like only with the effects. The cool thing is if I double click on this layer again, it brings back my layer. Let's go ahead and apply that stroke again. What happens if I also try to apply a drop shadow? And what happens if I tell it OK? I'm back right here and say it's, what does it look like if I get rid of the inner shadow? We have this. What if I don't want the drop shadow? We have this. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this again. We are still able to change this. Say for example, I'm going to hide these. Let me cancel this. Let me hide the background image. I'm going to now hide these. I'm just back right here. You have satin. You have color overlay. With the color overlay, this could be really cool where it's like, what happens if we start to drop the opacity? And in fact, I want a blue color again. So the more opaque, 100% means opaque is like you can't see through it. Dropping the opacity is adding transparency. If I want a gradient instead, you could always change your gradient and you have different options right here. You have drop downs. Oh, let's try this one right here. Even better. Ooh, I like this one now. And I want to drop the opacity. You could also do a pattern. And there's also an outer glow, which I can't really see simply because my color. Let's change this to, let's go to red. And let's increase the size as an example. And what happens if I turn on my drop shadow, my overlay, my gradient, my color, my inner glow, my inner shadow, stroke, even bevel and emboss, and tell it OK. No problem. I could always go back here. Let's bring back my background layer and say, you know what? Let's hide these. And I could still turn them on individually. Here's the bevel and emboss. Well, what does that look with the stroke? Okay, that kind of looks good. Or what if I decide I wanted to do that with color overlay? Or maybe the color gradient. Or let's get rid of the bevel and emboss and bring back the stroke and bring the drop shadow. You have endless possibilities. The cool thing is you could always go back and change this. Now, before we end here, I'm going to temporarily hide this. Let's go back to my robot here, or to Art 108 Visual Technologies. If I double click on this one, I could also have access to the different layer styles. So this will apply new layer styles onto this specific layer, but it does keep the settings that you had previously. So here we have the stroke, the settings, the inner shadow, the inner glow, the satin, the color overlay, the gradient. So one thing that you could also do, so say for example this is red, but what if I don't want it to be red? You could use something like the color overlay, and now your letters are no longer red, they're a different color. And what if you want to apply your gradient on top of that? Let's see, would this work? I don't know if this is the layer order, if that is coming into play. But okay, in this instance, I could just apply the gradient overlay, and now we have these colors here. I could add a drop shadow, but this time I want to decrease the distance of my drop shadow. That looks pretty cool. Do I want a stroke? This color is a little bit too overpowering. It's too close. What if I have a lighter blue? And let's go ahead and change the size a little bit smaller. Check that out. I'm going to go ahead and tell it OK. And I am happy with these results. But you know what? Maybe I want to move this text. I can move it up here. Maybe I want to resize it. Put it down there. Or maybe I want it to fall down here. The choice is up to you. You have many opportunities. So this is working, applying layer mask. I'm sorry, not layer mask, layer styles. But I do also want to remind you that these different layer styles work on any layer that has invisible pixels. That's a keynote in that, let me go ahead and duplicate this background image. This one does not have invisible pixels. If I try to apply even just, say, for example, a drop shadow, we won't be able to see it because my image is completely covered within here. The only way that I'm going to be able to see something is I'm going to use my eraser tool, and let me go ahead and let me have a hard round edge. I'm going to punch some holes here of different sizes. Now, because I have invisible pixels, I could see the effects, the drop shadow. I can now see the effect. So you need to have invisible pixels. All right, that concludes this learning video. In the next video, we're going to go over how to install your own fonts. So I'll see you there.